Welcome to the Absite Smackdown podcast. We'll talk clinical scenarios, Absite facts, and interesting general surgery knowledge. Now, let's get to it.
Hey guys, welcome back. It's me, your host, Jess, with Absite Smackdown podcast. With me, Dr. David Kashmir and Dr. Colton Lee. Hey guys.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, Jessica, Colton, here we are again.
No, back for another one. It just keeps flowing, right?
Yep, they sure do. Hey, now that version 3 is out in the wild, I've got the time. You want to do another one after this? Let's just do 3 or 4 more. I'm ready. I have time.
Week after week. So our topic is, again, we're in these end crunch times of the upcoming Absite. So just about prep. And as I was preparing for a new blog entry, I have to do some research and went to trusty Google to try and find stuff to write about. And I came across an article on Science Direct, and it was a study about the curve for Absite. And as I was reading it, I was like, oh, this could be a good podcast episode. So I sent it to you guys, and it seems like you agreed that would be a great episode. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So.
Yeah, Jessica, what you sent was just to give the citation, and hopefully the editors will put it beneath the podcast as a link. The original report is the surgical knowledge, quote, growth curve, unquote, predicting Absite scores and identifying at-risk residents. And that's from the Journal of Surgical Education, volume 78, issue 1. And this is hot off the press, 2021, pages 50 to 59. There's the citation for everybody at home. I'm interested to hear what y'all think about it.
The Absite Smackdown podcast now has a live review. Get your access for the only review conference that works best with your schedule. On call, can't travel, no time for an expensive hotel room or plane ticket? We've got you covered. Visit AbsiteSmackdown.com and select latest news to learn more and sign up today.
Actually, interesting. Sorry to interrupt. It's an interesting article, and I think that this is really a hot topic in surgical education and has been for a long time, right? Like, how do you evaluate your residents? How do you identify residents that either might not make it through the program or might not make very good surgeons afterwards? And then extrapolating from that, how do you identify people who will be a good resident for you, right? If you look at what they're looking at the comparison of the Absite performance to the USMLE scores, the patient's or the resident's gender. They're looking at relationship to their performance and other things as well. And they had some interesting results I didn't necessarily expect.
Yeah, they sure did. They say they modeled their performance, and that probably means a multiple regression or something similar. And then when you build these models, as you guys know, you kind of add in all the different things you track to see which ones have this sort of explanatory power to explain the variance in whatever you're looking at. And here, of course, it was scores. Really interesting. They found a couple things. I'll just go through them with you all almost and read them. 376 score reports from 130 residents. And the significant sort of predictors or things associated with a higher score, I should say. USMLE score, USMLE 1. USMLE 2, which will be useful. We'll probably get to that in a little bit. Male gender, interestingly, fell out as something that predicted in their residency a higher score. The number of practice questions completed also was a significant predictor. So I'm interested to hear, and they go on to kind of develop these individual models for how scores or like predictive, almost like a growth curve in pediatrics, for where the residents should be. And then they kind of just watch to see if the residents follow these curves or fell off. And, they conclude that, those factors we discussed and some of the factors we discussed were positive predictors of Absite performance. So really kind of an interesting article.
Yeah, I kind of want to hit on, I think you mentioned, right, this was a one center. So this was one complement of residents over a period of time. So it might not necessarily represent residents across the country.
Right.
Although if you've met one surgical resident, you've probably met many of them because we're very similar in kind of our lifestyle and our priorities and things like that and where we come from. But it's important to recognize that maybe this might not be able to represent all residents across the country or all programs across the country.
right? I mean, it was Mass Gen, and I think it was kind of surprising when I read it that they put in there about the gender, because whether that's true or not, that's usually not something that people are so quick to put out, because people try to be PC. So that was a little surprising to me that they, put that was their findings. And, you have to wonder, is that just, the area of where it's at, being at Mass Gen, or what do you think about that, Dr. K? Were you surprised also, or?
Some of the factors are really classic ones, like number of questions completed. That seems to be a predictor. We used to use a lot of evidence. When I was a program director, we had a sort of an online library of evidence, textbooks and all kinds of things. And some of the evidence was about the Absite itself and some of the classic papers. So, for example, there's so many to share. There's one about how I have my list here, at least some of them. Surgical resident accuracy in predicting their Absite score. This is a classic. Actually, it's from 2014. And that paper basically says residents can't predict their own score very well. They pretty consistently predict a higher score for themselves. So that's pretty useful because it allows us to know, okay, we got to disabuse ourselves of where we think we are and how good we think we are. We just got to work. And then some of the other ones are like factors that predict an intern's first Absite score are known by September. That's a classic from 2018, Al-Jamal et al. And this one kind of said, if you did an acute care surgery rotation, you did better on USMLE step 1, 2. Those things were associated with higher performance. Actually, 2 stints on the ACS service were a useful intern year tool. So that could kind of help, have an intern avoid a bad initial performance. And, the literature goes on. And what's so interesting to me is that now we're removing the USMLE in many ways, its predictive power, because it's going to pass fail. So as we discuss all this, I'm super curious to hear from Colton. Colton, what do you guys think, or what are you doing in your selection process, if anything? Because when I finished up as a program director, really we saw this change coming and nobody knew exactly what to do with the USMLE going to pass fail. Any thoughts on it?
Well, it's kind of on the horizon, right? Like, I think this is the last year, or maybe one more year, where the USMLE will be a scored test at step 1 at least.
Yeah.
And that's really heavily used, whether it's a good thing or not, to identify applicants for a program that to, for lack of a better term, weed out some people because you get so many applications for the program.
Yeah.
Now, I think that step 2 is going to become a lot more important, honestly, because it still is going to be a scored test. And often people, most people have taken step 2 by the time they apply for residency regardless. And some programs that, you may not meet their minimum criteria for step 1. If you show a great improvement in your step 2 score currently, then you can still, achieve an interview with them. So I'm pretty sure that step 2 is going to take a more of a role in the forefront of identifying people for interviews.
I think you're exactly right. I think that, as we lose the ability to use step 1, step 2 is going to become more important. And some of the students I teach are DO students, and they have the ability to decide what they're going to do. Are they going to do the ComSci or ComLex, or are they going to do the USMLE? And I think the point now is you're going to have to unlock a good USMLE step 2 score often to be able to get a residency interview. I think that's going to be focused on more and more, because I'll tell you, just like you said, we had, for the initial class I recruited for, we were recruiting off cycle. I had to go through 974 applications in about 2 weeks. And there was no easy way to do that. They came in as a flood to email from every which direction, unsolicited. Now, of course, we wanted to go through the match. That's what we want to do. But the challenge is when we went through our first cycle with the match and did everything right, the number of applications we had was remarkable. And there has to be some way to use some statistic or series of filters to kind of give applicants a score, or give applicants some thing that would let them have a higher chance of interview or progress on in the system. And one of the filters we used was board scores, because it was well known that a USMLE step 1 score over a certain threshold was positively associated with eventually passing your boards and these different things. There's a lot of evidence about it. So there had to be something, like you said, just because of the sheer number of applicants. And I think the challenge is what's going to happen now that USMLE Step 1's going to pass fail. So it's interesting to hear what y'all are doing with it.
The Absite Smackdown podcast is based on the best-selling review book, Absite Smackdown, the only Absite review with an entire video review course included. Visit absitesmackdown.com and pick it up today.
Well, and even beyond that, it kind of sparks the thought in my head of how do you identify a successful surgical resident, right? Is it their Absite score? Is it how are you going to identify a resident who's going to do well on their boards and be a good surgeon after that, right? Like, it's not all about just passing your oral boards and your written boards. It's about taking care of people and doing the right thing. And so while you obviously need to check those boxes, just like you had to check the same boxes with Step 1 and Step 2 in order to get your residency, it seems like we're on the same route. But I think that surgical education itself is going to undergo a revolution in the next 5 to 10 years, and we're going to stop looking at how many cases you do and start saying, did you do a lot in those cases? Did you do those cases well, and were those patients well taken care of afterwards? So I think,
Colton, I think you nailed it. This idea of competency-based training is coming more and more, and everyone's wondering, how do we do that? And it can be a separate talk for us, because we did try some things when I was with a big residency. We tried some things there. And then when I was a program director for residency, we tried some competency-based things there too. And like you said, really a lot of it centers around what makes a good surgeon. There have been addresses to the college about what makes it. There's a ton of literature, which we had in our resident library. What makes a good surgeon? What makes a good surgeon 21st century? What makes a good surgeon in this climate that healthcare is in? And there's a lot of thought on it. And, trying to utilize an in-service training exam or something else to get at that is super hard. I think you're right. I think it's going to go from a volume-based model to a competency-based model, and everybody's hunting for that. So it's been really interesting to kind of participate in that and kind of help roll out some of the different techniques to get to competency-based training. It's been really useful, and I think it's going to happen more and more. You're right.
I think we'll look back at this podcast in a couple of years and be like, all the answers to our questions.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, Jess, when I talk with the other chairs of surgery from the other medical schools around and the other associate deans, one of my roles is associate dean of simulation. So I have to help run a sim center. And so we kind of simulate to competency a lot of the different procedural things. And everyone is talking about what Colton said pretty consistently, which is how do we get at competency and evaluate it, and how are we going to do that in the future, especially when training hours, although there's evidence training hours does not change volume, there's still some thought on wouldn't value or competency be better than volume. And I think things are going to get there more and more. Like Colton said, you're right. The next couple of years, we're going to look back on this and look at this podcast very differently.
Right. Oh, this is really a good. I'm glad I found this one, but I think that just this conversation has brought up what we should do for our next podcast. So I think we already know now. So.
Well, I'm also curious, Colton, just before, I know our time's almost done. I know Jess is going to wind us up, but I'm curious, as much as you can share about how you guys evaluate prospective surgical resident students who come to you, because I think there'd be some value for the listeners out there and people who listen to the podcast. What do you all think makes a good surgical resident now? And just as importantly, what are the mechanics you guys use to select somebody now? I know you can't share everything and how the sausage is made, but just, what you can tell us about how you select people for your surgical residency.
Right. And so I've been involved in a couple of different programs throughout my residency, and I've had a couple of different program directors, and I've talked extensively with people about kind of what they think makes a good applicant, right? I've also been involved in interviewing residents or potential residents in the future. it comes down to, you have to find a way to weed through the pile of people and narrow it down. You have to hit the bare minimum requirements in order to really just kind of make it to the next step. We've had exceptional residents with very, average scores. We've had people with very high scores that may not even be an exceptional resident because they're lacking in other areas. So it's about getting that interview, and then showing that you can check the boxes and that you're committed to a career in surgery and that you've had exposure to the appropriate things. And then it's about a fit, right? Like, you find people that you want to spend 80 hours a week with. And there's some things that we look at outside of just the bare metrics. It's important in some programs and a lot of programs to make sure that we have a nice, diverse team that we work with. And so I know of programs that actually look through applications that don't meet their minimum requirements for an interview, and they pick some people out. And those people who, for one reason or another, bring something to the table, whether it's because of their background, their ethnicity, or if they're a member of a minority group like the LGBTQIA population, then those people are actually the strongest members of our team because they've had to fight to get where they're at. And so it's been very satisfying to be involved in that process as well.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you about that upfront filter process that needs to be reasonable. And then, as you say, some way, and this is what I tried for when I helped build a selection process, some way to select for someone who will fit in the residency in that particular culture. And then also sort of almost like a point system, like bonus points for what they're involved in, what their background is, whether that be their social ideas or their, cultural background, whatever it is. So it became almost like a points system all the way around, with different things given for different items or categories, or what the residency needed at any given time. If it needed someone who was more into research or less into research or something like that. So wherever you've seen that, I think you've seen some really useful, good systems to select people who will make for a good residency and hopefully good future colleagues, for sure.
And my advice from a resident side, right, as a former applicant, it will not hurt you to send an email during interview season to a program that you're interested in and say, hey, I'm from the area, I have family here, or, I'm really passionate about what you're doing in your program, and I would love the opportunity to either be a part of it or check out what's going on. And it might make you stand out in an applicant pool that otherwise you may not.
The Absite Smackdown podcast, bringing you the best of your Absite review.
I'll tell you, Colton, I got him from people, and they did make a difference. It would make me say, hey, let me just look at that person and see what numbers they have. Can they get through our first filters? And it put them on my radar. We also liked it when we knew people or when they were a known quantity. So there is a value to away rotations or knowing the residents who are there currently. And, of course, if someone were friends with somebody, we would kind of try to, have them sort of abstain from voting, but at the same time, they could tell us more about the applicant, and we would allow that. So everybody's all over the map with what they do. But I would just share that there is some value to being a known quantity to a residency. Of course, we followed all the match rules. There are very strict requirements about things, but being a known quantity is useful. You're not really allowed to communicate exactly with candidates around the match, but I would receive all these unsolicited emails and different things like that. People would somehow find a way to get in touch. Programs, as we said, though, have strict match rules for what they can and can't say to you. But I'll share that I did get them. And when I got them, you kind of wonder to yourself, oh, okay. And if you saw that candidate's name again, you couldn't help but have seen it once before. But again, I want to be clear that we followed all the match rules, and there are specific things you can and can't do. That said, there is a value to knowing the particulars of a residency, what it looks for, who's there already, and kind of their background. And if you do know someone in a residency, there is a value to that because they know you better. They know what you might bring.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. I hope all those listeners out there got some helpful hints. We'll put the link to the articles down below so that you can look for yourself. But, thanks for tuning in. And don't forget, #Absite Smackdown.
Get more Absite content in your daily routine. Visit us on Instagram at daily.absite.fact, on Facebook at Absite Smackdown, or LinkedIn at Absite Smackdown. And you can catch the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or any place you listen to your favorites. Don't forget our YouTube channel, Absite Smackdown.